We are starting out, we're going to do a couple of tutorials. We're going to do a tutorial and then we're going to do the assignment at the end of getting started with Python. So what you would want to do is use your File Explorer guy, right here, the folder guy. And on the left-hand side, you want to navigate down to wherever your information is stored. And on Tuesday, I use my USB drive. And we want to navigate over here. So if you double click or click the little triangle over here, it'll open up. And we made a Spring 25, which is actually in the getting started, the installing Python somewhere. It's at the beginning of this assignment. Yes, it is. So we open it up, or you double click, whichever you want to do. You can double click, it'll do the same thing. We want to eventually end up with week 1 showing up over here. That's where we want to be. If anybody is not there, let me know. Otherwise, I will assume everybody's good. If you have questions or problems as we go, please ask and stop me. All right, so I'm using Windows 11, which probably most everybody is, unless you have a Mac or Linux or something. Windows 11, you right click, and you have to go to show more options to bring up the option that we want. So there's the show more options over there on the lower left. And that'll bring up the option we want, which is open with code. We want to open the folder. And that will open up Visual Studio Code, and all our files will be sitting here nice and handy. We can work on them and do whatever we need to do. And all the files we create will automatically be in week 1. We won't have lost puppies. We're going to go through a tutorial first. We're going to go through the savings account tutorial, and I'm not going to necessarily type everything in. I'm going to do enough of it that I can explain what's happening and calculating and how we're displaying information. You will want to finish it up on your own later on. But the first step is you can either click this guy where it says new file, or if you like to right click, new file. Does the same thing. We want a new blank file. And we're going to name it savings. And I realize in my tutorial, I misspelled account. So you don't have to misspell. If I misspell, that doesn't mean you have to misspell. So we've used variables to store information that the user types in so that we can work with it later on. But sometimes we want information in our program that does not change. Information that we're storing in our program that does not change is called a constant, meaning it's always going to have the same value. So for instance, if you're working for QuickBooks, writing the QuickBooks program, and you have the sales tax rate for Nebraska, and you refer to the sales tax 25 times in the program. So if you hard coded in 7% or whatever it is, in those 25 places, oops, Nebraska just changed their sales tax, we have to update QuickBooks, then you have to go through those 25 places and change it. Well, we don't want to do that. We're going to put it in one place and change it once. So in our case, we're going to put interest underscore rate. Now notice I'm doing it uppercase. There's a reason for that. And my interest is, 0.45. It's not too bad. I don't know that anybody's getting quite that much right now on anything, but pretty close. That's probably a better way to do it. So when you do something in uppercase like that, whenever we're doing a variable, we have done like this. We've done lowercase. If we have another word, we put in an underscore, and then we type in the next word, and then we do underscores, and we don't do any uppercase. We do all underscores. That's how we do variables. And they can change. When we do uppercase like this, that means interest rate's always going to be the same. And we'll use this later on. Okay? If not, let me know. All right. So we are going to get the input from the user. The only thing the user is going to put in is how much is in their savings account. And then we're going to let them know what their balance is after we add all the interest to it. So this is just like a banking program. Balance. We create a variable in Python just by typing in a name. Equals is the assignment statement. And we want to get input from the user. So we'll say, what is, enter your current balance. That's what it is. But you can do any prompt you want. This is just what I have in my tutorial. Oh, see, it doesn't like it if you don't type it right. There are certain words that Python and other programming languages recognize as being part of that language. So now, besides learning English, you'll also know Python. Because Python learning a computer programming language is very much like learning another language. So we're going to take this information, assign it to this storage space, like the little box that we have in our computer memory. Any information coming into a program is always text. And you can't multiply Fred times George. You're not going to end up with a number. We want this to be a number, so we put the word float in front of it, which is how computers refer to decimal numbers. So this is a float. The other type that we'll use will be an integer, which I don't know if we've used an integer yet or not, but we will get there. So the two types of numbers we'll use will be decimal numbers and integers. Right now we're using a float. So whatever I type in, if I type in 3045, that number will be stored here. And we can work with that number and calculate later on, which is our next step. So we're going to create another variable that's called new balance. Well, the user is not going to type this in. We're going to do some calculations with it. Now, just like in math, there's something called the order of operations. You can depend on the order of operations to do things, or my recommendation is always to use parentheses to make sure what you want to have calculate first happens first. So the formula we would use to find out how much interest we have since whenever it was that we put stuff in would be balance times interest rate. There it is. It tries to fill in stuff we've already typed in. So if I have $4,000 and I multiply it by 0.045, I'd end up with what, $200 or something like that. That'd be the interest that I've accumulated to this point. Does that give me my new balance? No. I want to make sure this is multiplied first. So that gives me my interest. I can then add my balance, my $4,000, whatever I have, to it, and that will give me my balance with interest. Now, in math, you've already learned that the order of operations means that multiplying and dividing happens first, and then adding and subtracting. So this would work fine without the parentheses. However, I like to be explicit, meaning I like to look and see exactly what's going to happen without having to remember a rule. The rule you have to remember here is whatever inside the parenthesis happens first. So it's actually the same up here. What's inside here happens first. So input prints this out. Input also gets information from the user. So input does really two things, which is kind of handy. It prints out a prompt. It gets information from your keyboard. And notice I have surrounded that with another parenthesis, which means that gets operated last. So it takes the string, converts it to a float. So this is the same as the order of operations. It does things from the inside out. If we wanted to be really explicit here, which would be ridiculous, but you could do this because this calculation happens, then this calculation happens. So order of precedence using parentheses is important in a programming language. So far, so good?
So just to be clear, the float will carry the interest rate after the enter your current balance down to the interest rate into the new balance.
Yeah,
So,
this balance,
yeah.
this balance, this balance, because we
Yeah.
haven't changed it.
Yeah.
We're using it to calculate with.
Mhm.
This will retrieve the value that's stored in there, multiply it by the value stored in this constant, which will give some sort of a number like 40. And then we add it to the balance, which is the same as it was before. So we're not changing it. Anything on the right-hand side doesn't get changed.
So you don't have to constantly keep on adding to the code, right?
I'm not sure what you mean.
You only have to put float once.
Yeah.
Right, it's always going to be a float unless you change it. You can change it, but we're not going to do that for quite some time.
No, that's-
So, okay, that's what you're asking. So
Yeah.
once I've said that this is storing a number, it's storing a number.
Okay,
You can change that, but we're not going to do that for quite some time because it's confusing enough just to remember what variables are. So this is a float, this is a float, this is a float, this is a float. This is a float because that's what we put into it. So Python will look at that and say, oh, that's a float. If we put in a 5 in here, it would say, oh, that's an integer. So Python recognizes things by what you put in. So it's very smart. All right, so now we're going to display things in a way that we're going to be using for the rest of the class because it allows us to make things look pretty. And it is the latest way to, what we want to do is output and combine strings and variables. And let's do an example of what would happen if you don't add in all the fancy stuff that I'm going to be putting in. So we do print. Now we're going to put an F. F says, I want this to be an F string. You don't have to know why it's F. F probably means format. So F means format string. It gives us a lot more capability, which you'll see in a minute. So we do current balance, right? So this is going to literally be in the, it'll type it out in the program. If we want to put a variable in here, we have to do a fancy, we use curly braces. There, that's bigger. And anything in here retrieves the variable, retrieves the value of whatever variable we've put in there. There. So that'll retrieve the value. So this will say current balance 4,155 or whatever it happens to be. And this is the way we'll display everything from this point on. So let me demonstrate why we want to add in these little weird oh, yeah, we need $sign here, don't we? The $sign is just text. It just indicates that it's money. So that's not fancy. That's just I'm typing in a $sign. Let me run this. All right, my current balance is 1025.2. Oh, somebody pressed the enter key too soon, didn't they? I accidentally hit the enter key. I have $12.20. Not a lot of money, is it? There, my current balance is 12.2. Does that look like normally how you see money? Don't you usually see 20? Yeah, well, if I had 12, it would then just display 12. So the fancy part, we're going to say, I always want to see 2 decimal places after my number. That's the fancy part we're adding here. So we stick this right there. The colon says, here is some formatting coming up. We want to change how this number is displayed. Comma is used if we have a big value, which I'll demonstrate that in a minute. So, I'll do it right now. So if we type in, can you tell by looking at it quickly how much that is? No, if we're going to display information, we typically would do this, wouldn't we? We'd use a comma separator. Now you can see that's 10 million. We would never calculate with that. If we're calculating with 10 million, we have to do it this way. But when we're displaying it to the user, isn't that easier to see that it's 10 million? It is. I'll agree with myself. All right, so I'm just gonna comment that out for now. So that's what that comma does. If something goes over 1,000, then it starts putting commas in if necessary. The period says I'm working with floats and I want to say how many characters after the period. And we want 2 of them. And the F stands for the type of number, it's a float. So yes, there is an interpretation to all that. I would say when you want to display floats with 2 characters, just, this would be a good ninja note to put somewhere and remember where this program is. Because we use this a lot. Because it makes our numbers look much nicer. So let's do an example here. So say my current balance is 1, 2, 6, 5. I'm just very rich. And I have, like 10 cents. There. See, that makes it look very nice. It's easy to read. You can see that I have $1 million. By the way, I do not have $1 million. I am a teacher, so no way as a teacher are you going to have $1 million unless you already had it before you started teaching. Yes. So that's what that fancy little business does. Put that somewhere where you can find it again. Keep this sentence or whatever. Remember to look back at this program because we'll use this method a lot because it displays things very nicely. Yes, let's see, important, isn't it? All right. So in the tutorial, I have this in there, which is really not needed. Every key you type on the keyboard puts a character into the program. And there's literally a character. Like when you press the enter key, it actually does /n. You just don't see it. It's what's called a non-printing character. So the only thing this does is move this down to the next line. So I probably put that in at some point. Somebody asked a question and I put it in and I just forgot it was in there. So this will demonstrate how that works. You don't have to put that in there. So my current balance is, see how it moved it down a line? That's what the /n is for. It's not necessary at this point. I probably should change it and not put that in there because I don't explain. Well, maybe I do explain it, but who knows?
I didn't see it in there.
It may not be there yet. Yeah, I'm sure that I was talking someday and typed it in there and then forgot it was in there. Because that will happen. My tutorials are not always exactly what they should be, but they do work. And so as you do the next print statements, anytime you have something with a decimal, you'll use this. The next one where I'm printing out the interest rate, I'm doing a calculation. Ooh. So if I want to know the interest rate, do we normally see interest like this? 0.045. You'll say, oh, the current rate of inflation is 4.5%, right?
Yeah.
Or you get a 2.1% raise.
Mhm.
But you can't calculate with 2.1, you have to convert it into a decimal, which means you're moving it over two decimal places. So how do you move it back? How would I move that to the left? 10, 100. That moves it to the left. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm showing it in the normal format that you would see it in. Oh, let's run it and see if that worked. There's something in the air today that's just making a mess of my nose and my throat. There. So we're used to seeing 4.5. So all the math stuff that you've learned, yeah, it comes into this. I'm pretty sure this is probably basic math. Excuse me. When you start Susie's Square Calculator, it tells you the formulas that we're going to use to do the area and the perimeter. And it gives you the name. and I give you the outline of how the program's going to work. And I will do this as we go, because what I want to show is that we figure out how the program works first before we just start typing in code. So in the PDF, you should be able to take your mouse and drag through this stuff and select it. And you can either right click and copy, which I'm not a fan of because it's very slow. You can do Control C to copy it. And when you go over to your, oh, I don't have a program yet, do I? So I should create a program. I will use the little button up here that says New File. Square calculator.py. We always use py at the end. All right. So we copy this and paste it into here, and look at there. You got the program halfway done because you know what you're supposed to do. Resume recording. So this gives us the pieces that we need to make our program work. And what this program is supposed to do is get the area and perimeter. I'm sorry, it's supposed to get the length of the side of a square, convert it to a float, and then calculate the area of that square and the perimeter, and then display it. And that's what I've done here. Here I said print a creative program title. You could copy the title from, like, Sean, you have the savings account tutorial. You could copy and paste that in here and just change the name. It doesn't have to be that fancy. You can just print out, oh, you do have to type it right. Python in any programming language is very fussy. Or it can be very simple like this, square calculator. That just announces to the user that this is what the program is called. It's called square calculator. If you want to get fancy and, put in some dashes, make it look pretty. Not that that's very pretty, but, it's something. So that's creative. Oh, maybe I'll put one of these at the end. There, yeah. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is get the length of a side from the user and convert it to float. Oh dear, I forgot how to do that. So what do? I go back to one of my tutorials where I did exactly that. This is exactly the same thing. Do you have to type in things from scratch if you've already typed it in once? Usually it's faster to copy and paste and modify. So in this case, I'm going to copy and paste this and then modify it. So let me get this out of the way. So I'm going to select this line because this is exactly what I want to do. Not exactly, but we can change it. I do need to get input. I do need to convert it to float. But this gives me what's called the syntax. The syntax means how you type it in. And you have to type it in right or Python yells at you. So I'm going to do a Control C, which is a keyboard method, which I think I went through that, but Control V pastes. Well, balance is really not a good name for a length variable, is it? But a good name for a variable for the length of the side would be length or side. Something like that that describes whatever the user is going to be typing in. And I would change my prompt to say enter the length. Yeah, and I don't have to worry about the parentheses because I know this code worked before. It's going to work now. I have just modified it for this program. We want to take the formula, which is in the assignment, wherever I put my assignment. There he is. So up here, I give you the formula. Well, it's not very complicated, is it? Area equals, oh, and that should not really be A, probably it should be L for length, but I must be how the formula is actually written. So we take the length and we square it. So area equals the length squared. There's a couple ways we can do squaring. So we need a variable to store area in, and you notice in math, which most of you are taking or have taken or something, they use just single letters for their variables. On computers, we use words that describe what's going on for our variable names. So length. What's one way to calculate a square of something without having to know what the square operator is? This is basic math. How do you square length?
Multiplying it by itself.
Yep. There is an operator in Python that'll square things for us, but this works just fine for right now. Length times length gives us length squared. That gives us the area of the square. Now we're going to do the same thing with the perimeter. The perimeter equals, so maybe I'll just copy this in here. Else it's misbehaving. There we go. I'll copy in the formula into the program and put it right here in my comment. Oh, there we go. So perimeter makes 4. Okay, well, A should actually be length, shouldn't it? So perimeter. I was doing this the other day in another class and I had a hard time spelling perimeter. Equals area times 4, or 4 times area, doesn't matter. And that gives us the perimeter. So now we have the perimeter, we have the area. And suddenly I forgot how to display results and make them look pretty. So what do? I go back to one of my programs where I have done that already. Where did we do that? Savings account? Yeah. This guy right here. This guy has all the little commas and dots and everything that I need. I just need to change the variables and the strings like I did before. So I'm going to copy this code I've already written. I'm going to copy it and put it in here, because then I don't have to remember, oh, is it a comma first or whatever it's supposed to be. So I want to print the area first. Oh, I didn't do that right, did I? It's supposed to be length. There we go. Not the area times 4. If I make a blunder like that, please let me know. All right, so this is supposed to be area. And then instead of current balance, I would just put area. And all this, oh, I guess area is not $1, is it? There we go. It's just a number. And perimeter is going to be exactly the same thing. So I can copy this and change things to the other one. Perimeter. There. And that way I don't have to remember any of this. I can copy it and paste it from code I've already done.